In the previous lecture, I showed you that if you select the camera, press Ctrl and move the x-axis, the axis system is really changing position. You notice how the red axis here, the x-axis now is pointing upward. Now why is that? I will explain to you that in a different example, a simple one. I have here two layers in 3D where the anchor point of the rectangle and the layer are just at the same spot for both of them, so there is no confusion. You notice now I am in the local axis mode. There are three switches here, you want to say, that determine which axis mode you are using. So by default, After Effects goes for the local axis mode. What does it mean? Let's choose this layer, choose our rotation tool, and rotate on the x-axis. You notice that the y and z axis are rotating. So actually in local mode, the axis system is not fixed, but it is fixed according to the layer. So the x-axis will always point in that direction according to the layer, to that direction of the layer, the y-axis to that direction of the layer, and the z-axis outward perpendicular to the layer. So if I rotate the layer, the axes are also rotating. So now there is a big difference between these axes and these axes. They're not the same. Each one of the layers has its own axis system according to the layer. Let's take this one and rotate it. Let's rotate it on the y. You notice that the red and the blue, that is x and z, are rotating. Same for here. If I rotate on the z, you notice the axes are truly rotating. Now, since this is a local mode, it means the orientation of the axes are always according to the orientation of the layer. That's pretty good. That is give you a lot of power to work between layers. So you know how this layer is pointing, that is Z. Let me open the P. Now that we have rotated these layers, I want you to look at the position and the position coordinates when I move according to the axis. Let me choose the x-axis. I will take one layer at a time and choose the x-axis. You notice x only is moving. That's normal. Let's take the y now. And you notice now the y is not the only parameters that is changing. It's the y and z parameter that are changing because the local axis here has changed. If I use the z, you notice also not only the z is changing. Now, if I use the other rectangle and I use the z, you notice the z and the x are changing. It's moving. And if I use the y, maybe only the y is changing. And if I use the x, of course, x and z are going to change because I did the rotation. Now, these coordinates are according to the world view, world axis mode. It means the world view. If I click on this mode, notice now the axes are identical, whatever the rotation is. If I take the rotation tool, for example, and use that layer to rotate, notice only x is rotating. If now I take the x and start rotating, you notice the axes are not moving. The axes now in the world axis mode, the axes are fixed according to the world. You could just imagine them in the corner of the composition, you know, totally not moving. So now the axes are not moving. You see how? So y did not move, or z and x did not move according to the y. Let's take here the orientation, or we're going to take the rotation. We don't want the rotation, we want orientation only. So what I will do, I will write here orientation, press enter. I see only the orientation. Fine. Look at the orientation now for each layer. Okay, now you see that in the shapes only the x is moving. If you were in local mode and I rotate, many are moving. I'll use the y. You notice several coordinates are changing. So in the world axis mode, axes do not rotate. The layers rotate and all the coordinates change. And we said that the coordinates here according to the world axis mode. The last one is the view axis mode. If I click on it, this one is only about the views. For example, if I choose this view and go to custom view, the access system now is according to the view. They completely changed and they have nothing to do with the layer or with the world access. If you're looking from that point, for example, here you are, your access are all identical and you're working with the view. And that is also not bad. It's okay, but it's totally useless for the active camera. So you're just orienting according to the view. Sometimes it's good, sometimes you can manipulate things with it, but not really. I don't find it. Maybe you might find a very good use to it. You notice when I change the views, the whole access system changed for the three of them, the layer and the cameras and everything. If I take front view or custom view 2, you notice also it has changed. So the X is according to the X of the view. This is a front view. Y is according to the up, that is the front view, so it points up, and the Z is also pointing outward. Same for all the elements that you have in this layer. Now, let's go back to local view. I will continue the lesson with local view. This is the default mode. And local view is quite powerful because it will tell me where my layer is moving. It's true, I want to move it in the Z. But moving it in the Z space or the Z space does not mean that it's moving absolute. It's moving relative to itself. And that's pretty interesting and pretty powerful, by the way. In the world view, I know exactly where my layer is positioned according to the whole composition, not relative to other layers. So I will have to always look at the axis. Sometimes in animation you don't want to do that. You want to be able to move a layer in space according to another layer. And actually, if you think about it, you do not move in the world, in the real world. You do not move according to the axis to get to somebody. You move according to that somebody. If it's at 10 feet from you, you will direct yourself according to that person and you move according to his axis or your orientation. If you want to orient yourself according to the world axis to move 10 feet toward that person that's standing at a certain distance from you, then you got some problems, you know, your X and Y and your steps. So what do? You orient yourself toward that person. So your axis system is going towards him. So your X is facing him. So you oriented yourself. I don't know if this example will make sense to you, but really in real world, we do not work with world axis. We work with, relative axis. That's what's called in math. And the relative axis is according to the layer itself here. And in After Effects, they call them local axis mode. World axis mode is relative to the world, it's fixed and only relative to the composition altogether. The view axis mode is quite helpful, but it's only for the views. So I hope you understood me. It's not complicated. The most important that you know that I'm going to continue with the local axis mode and not the world axis mode. The world axis mode could be useful for you if you are, trying to do difficult animations and getting lost in between layers. You can use the world axis mode. But now, what I do not recommend at all is to start switching. Now use the local axis mode, you make a movement, use the camera tools, then you go to world axis mode and try to find out what's happening and move the axis. It is very hard to do that. You have to be a really very strong spatial person and knowing exactly what's happening in your composition or your layers. So I hope you like this lecture. I hope I was very informative. Now, some lessons will tell you use the world axis mode because you are a beginner. I will not recommend that. I will go to local axis mode and start working with local axis mode. It is much better to orient layers according to each other and according to themselves than to orient the layers according to the whole composition. If you have very many layers, then things will become very hard. You notice when we did multi-planning, I used local axis mode. I didn't even mention it, and everything went very fine, and we could see how our layers are oriented. If we had used the world axis mode in the multi-planning, then, every time you move a layer, the axis will stay fixed, and you're doubting where your layer is really pointing. True, in short, local axis mode will show you the axis, will show you where your layer is pointing in the three axes, and in the world it show you where your layer is positioned according to the whole composition. Thank you very much for listening.